Welcome, YouTubers, to another episode in my Grammar Hero series. In this video, there's going to be 80 new practice test questions that should closely mirror what you should expect to see in the mathematics knowledge subtest of both the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, that is the ASVAB, as well as a pre-screening Internet Delivered Computer Adaptive Test, that is the PiCAT. As a quick reminder, on the actual test, you'll have 20 minutes to answer 16 questions. In other words, you have to move through this subtest of the ASVAB very quickly, and likewise, you're not permitted to use a calculator or a reference sheet on this subtest of the ASVAB. Of course, in order to get the most from this video, you'll want to pause the video after I read a practice test question, attempt to solve it on your own, and then resume playing your video to check your solution. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I also want to mention this. In my opinion, you should not spend more than $30 on test prep for the ASVAB. Truth be told, the vast majority of you will pass this test as long as you spend a week to a month studying for it. And for that reason, I recommend that you buy a copy of a study guide from Amazon or Barnes& and Noble at most. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't point this out as well. Recently, some foreign tutors, particularly from India and particularly on Facebook, have started posting tutoring scams. What they're doing is just copying and pasting stuff they find online in an effort to get you to sign up for tutoring with them. As you can imagine, given that they speak English very poorly, the quality of tutoring that you're going to receive is going to be so poor that it's almost worthless. Again, literally everything you need to pass this test is freely available on my YouTube channel in the form of playlist, as well as on my website, asvabapp.com. You do not have to spend a dime to pass this test if you don't want to. So, with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started with these practice test questions. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says if x over 4 plus 5 equals negative 13, then x equals. So, in other words, we're going to be solving this equation for x. And again, on the ASVAB and PiCAT, you will have scratch paper, but you're also not permitted to use a calculator. The first thing we want to do in an effort to get x equal to something by itself is to subtract 5 from both sides. This leaves you with x over 4 over here. Negative 13 minus 5, that's the same thing as 13 plus 5, albeit negative. 3 plus 5 is 8, so this is going to be negative 18. To get rid of this 4 under the x variable, we're going to multiply both sides by 4. This crosses out, leaving us with x over here. All we have to work out is negative 18 times 4. Again, a negative times a positive is going to be a negative. What is 18 times 4? If you can't do it mentally, do it off to the side. 8 times 4 is going to be 32. Carry a 3. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 3 is 7. So x in this case is negative 72. A. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says which of the following fractions is the smallest? Now, for the ASVAB and PiCAT, it's very important to know some common fraction and decimal equivalents because in a problem like this, you would automatically know that 1/2 is the same thing as zero point 0.5. Likewise, you would automatically know that 2/3 is the same thing as 0.66 repeated. Now, in order to convert these other fractions to decimals so that we can compare them, we're going to do one of two things. Let's take a look at 14 over 28. You should recognize in this case that both 14 and 28 have a common factor of 14. 14 divided by 14 is 1. 28 divided by 14 is 2. So 14 over 28 is the same thing as 1/2 when we reduce it, which we know is the same thing as zero point 0.5. So the only other thing we have to do is convert 4/9 to decimal so we can compare it. And again, all fractions can be read as long division. We could read this as 4 divided by 9. And by doing this long division, we'll have our decimal equivalent accordingly. Let me get this out of the way real quick. How many times does 9 go into 4? It doesn't. So that's going to prompt me to add a decimal and a couple of zero placeholders. I'm not going to need all of them. But again, we said 9 does not go into 4. So we're going to put a 0 over the 4 and we're going to bring up our decimal. Now the question is, how many times does 9 go into 40 without going over? 9 times 4 is 36. 9 times 5 is 45. So this is going to be 4. 9 times 4 is 36. 40 minus 36 is 4. Bring down this 0. Again, as we just mentioned, 9 goes into 40 4 times without going over. Uh, 9 times 4 is 36. 40 minus 36 is 4. So you can see that this is going to be 0.444 repeated. So we know this is 0.44 repeated. Question is, which of these decimals is the smallest? Well, we have zero point 0.5 that repeats itself twice. 0.44 is smaller than 0.66. So the smallest fraction is 4 ninths, which we convert it to a decimal via some simple long division over here. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the area of a triangle with a base of 12 inches and a height of 6 inches? So as a quick reminder, you're not permitted to use a calculator or a reference sheet on the ASVAB or PiCAT. That said, you have to know a lot of basic formulas from geometry, including how to find the area of a triangle. That's area equals 1/2 base times height, of course. In this case, according to the problem, the base is going to be 12 and the height is going to be 6. So let's plug those in and solve accordingly. This becomes 1/2 times 12 times 6. And the easiest way to do this one is to take this 1/2 and multiply it by 12 to get started. You should be able to do that mentally. 1/2 times 12 is 6, so this becomes 6 times 6. If you can't do 1/2 times 12 mentally, you're probably on the struggle bus a little bit, but that's it. I'll do it off to the side very quickly. 1/2 times 12. You could write 12 as a fraction by placing it over 1. Now we're multiplying two fractions, so you're going to multiply straight across. 12 times 1 is 12. 2 times 1 is 2. 12 divided by 2 is 6. Uh, and here we just have 6 times 6, which is 36. So the area of this triangle is clearly B, 36 square inches. ASVAB PiCAT arithmetic reasoning practice test question. We're trying to find the area of the shaded section of this figure. Of course, that's going to be equal to the area of the rectangle, which is length times width, minus the area of both of these circles. Again, there are two circles that are identical. The area of one of the circles is pi r squared. Let's plug in these values. Length and width is easy to identify. That's 8 and 4 minus 2 times pi. What is the radius of one of these circles? We can see that its diameter is 4. Its radius is half of that, so its radius is 2. So this is 2 squared. Let's work this out. This becomes 32 minus 2 squared is 4 times 2 is 8. So this is 32 minus 8 pi. Again, we're told to let pi be 3.14. I'm not going to work this out in the video, but if you do your math correctly, this becomes 2512, and 32 minus 2512 is going to be 6.88. So this one is C. ASVAB PiCAT Math Knowledge Practice Test question says, if the side length of the square is 10 inches, what is the area of the triangle? So we're going to be finding the area of a triangle. Let's go ahead and write down that formula. It's area equals 1/2 base times height. Again, according to the problem, we know the side length of this square is 10. In squares, all the sides are equal. So if one side is 10, they're all 10. We can see that the base of this triangle is 10. So let's plug that in accordingly. And what is its height? The height of the triangle is always from the apex straight down. We can see that that is the same as the side length of this square. So this is also 10. 10 times 10 is 100. 100 times 1/2 is 50, so the area of our triangle is C, 50 square inches. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the surface area of a box that is 7 inches wide, 13 inches tall, and 9 inches long? So for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you're not permitted to use a calculator or a reference sheet, so you have to know how to find the surface area of a rectangular prism. Again, rectangular prisms have 3 dimensions. They have lengths, widths, and heights. And finding the surface area is pretty straightforward. Its surface area is going to be equal to, and all you're going to do is multiply these three things together and put a 2 in the front of it and add it together like so. We have 2, we have length times width, plus 2, length times height, plus 2, width times height. And just like that, we found this formula to find the surface area of a rectangular prism. Let's go back and identify each of these things. It's 7 inches wide, so W is 7. 13 inches tall, so its height is 13, and 9 inches long, so length is 9. So let's just plug things in and work this out accordingly. Our length is 9, our width is 7 plus 2. Our length is 9. Our height is 13 plus 2. Our width is 7, and our height is 13. All right, so all we have to do is work this out. Um, 9 times 7, you should be able to do mentally using your times tables. That's going to be 63 plus 2 times 9 times 13 is something I'll work off to the side very quickly. 9 times 3 is 27, so bring down a 7, carry a 2. 1 times 9 is 9, plus 2 is going to be 11, so this is 117. Plus 2 times 7 times 13. Likewise, I'm going to do off to the side. 7 times 3 is 21. Bring down a 1, carry a 2. 7, 8, 9. So this is 91. All right, now for all of these, I'm going to have to work them off to the side as well so as not to make a mistake. This is a very tedious but easy problem. We have 63 times 2. Uh, 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 2 is 12. So this is 126 plus, let's do 117 times 2. 7 times 2 is 14, carry a 1. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. 2 times 1 is 2. So this is 234 plus, and then we have 91 times 2. 1 times 2 is 2. 9 times 2 is 18. So this is 182. And finally, we're going to add all three things together. We have 126, 234, and 182 to add together. 6 plus 4 is 10, plus 2 is 12. Carry a 1. 3 plus 3 is 6. 6 plus 8 is going to be 14. Carry a 1. That's 2, 3, 4, 5. So the surface area of this rectangular prism is going to be 542 square inches. So this one is going to be B. This ASVAB PiCAT arithmetic reasoning practice test question says two go-karts are racing on a circular track with a perimeter of 360 feet. Camera 1 is following go-kart 1 and camera 2 is following go-kart 2. If the angle between the two cameras is 180 degrees, how far apart are the two go-karts? So in this case, you have to know that we're going to be finding the arc length of this circle. To do that, we're going to take theta, which is the measure of the central angle. We know that's 180 degrees in this case. We're going to divide that by 360 degrees. That is the number of degrees in the circle. And then we're going to multiply that by 2 pi r. 2 pi r is the circumference or the perimeter of the circle. In this case, we were told that the perimeter or circumference of this circle is 360. So all we have to do is 180 over 360 times 360. These cross out, leaving us with 180. So they're 180 feet apart on the track. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the circumference of a circle that has a diameter of 10? As a quick reminder for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you're not given a reference sheet or a calculator. That said, you do have to know some basic formulas, including how to find the area and circumference of circles. As far as circumference of a circle is concerned, there are two formulas you can use. The circumference of a circle is either pi times its diameter, or circumference is 2 pi times its radius accordingly. These formulas are equivalent. That said, in this case, we were only given the diameter of the circle, so we're going to plug in 10 for d. This becomes circumference equals pi times 10, which is the same thing as 10 pi. Now, if this said use 3.144 pi, we would actually have to multiply this one out. That said, you can see the answer is there as B10 pi. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says the absolute value of 12 minus 16 equals. So we're going to do the absolute value of 12 minus 16. 12 minus 16 is going to be negative 4. So we're trying to find the absolute value of negative 4. Well, here's the definition of absolute value if you haven't seen it in a while. It's the distance between the number and 0 on the number line. So our number in this case is negative 4. It's right here. What is the distance between negative 4 and 0 on the number line? Well, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So the absolute value of negative 4 is simply positive 4. So this one is going to be C. This practice test question for the math knowledge subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT says, which pairs of angles are equal in measurement? So the first thing I want to point out is that angles 1, 2, 3, and 4 share a vertex. Angles that are on opposite sides of a shared vertex are equal. So angles 1 and 4 are equal, 3 and 2 are equal. Down here, 5, 6, 7, and 8 share a vertex. So 7 and 6 are equal, 5 and 8 are equal. Additionally, you have to know the alternate interior angles theorem, which says if two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then the alternate interior angles are also congruent, that is, equal to each other. So let's go through our answer choices one by one. 1 and 2. 1 and 2 form a straight line, therefore, they are supplementary. Angles 4 and 5. Well, as you can see, those are alternate interior angles, therefore, they are going to be equal. So this one is B. This math knowledge practice test question for the math knowledge subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT says this: using 22 over 7 to approximate pi, find the area of a circle that has a diameter of half an inch. All right, so since we're going to have to calculate the area of a circle, the first thing I'm going to do is write down that formula. That's area equals pi r squared. You do have to know that formula for this test, of course. Now, if we look back at the question, it says our circle has a diameter of half an inch. To use this formula, we need radius. So you also have to know that the diameter of a circle is always equal to twice its radius. In this case, we know our diameter is half an inch, so that's going to be equal to 2r. And we're going to solve this little equation for r to find out how long our radius is. To clear this 2 in front of the r, we're going to multiply both sides by 1/2. This 2 and this 1/2 cross out. Again, 2 times 1/2 is just 1. So that's just r over here. 1/2 times 1/2. When you multiply fractions, you just multiply straight across. In other words, we do 1 times 1, which is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. So now we know our radius is 1/4. We can go ahead and plug it in. Likewise, we know that we're going to be using 22 over 7 to approximate pi, so we'll plug that in as well. So this becomes 22 over 7 times 1/4 squared. So we're going to follow the order of operations here. That is, we're going to do this exponent first, and then we'll do the multiplication after that. What is 1/4 squared? And I'm going to do this off to the side so you can see it. When you square a fraction, this square goes both to the 1 as well as the 4. 1 squared is just 1. So this becomes 22 over 7 times 1 over, what is 4 squared? That's 4 times 4, or 16. All right, again, we're multiplying two fractions, so we're going to multiply straight across. Before we multiply straight across, we want to try to reduce this via cross reduction to make this math a lot easier. I know that 2 goes into 16 8 times. Likewise, 2 goes into 22 11 times. So this is going to be 11 times 1, which is 11, over 7 times 8, which is 56. So our area is 1156 square inches, which we can see is answer choice D. This is a pretty hard problem because, again, you had to know that the diameter of a circle is always twice its radius, and you also had to know how to square and multiply fractions. So again, this is kind of a tough problem. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the area of a circle that has a diameter of 4 units? Use 3.14 to approximate pi. So for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you have to know some basic formulas from geometry, including how to calculate the area of a circle. Area of a circle is pi r squared, where r is the radius, of course. In this case, we were given the diameter of the circle, so we also have to know that the diameter of a circle is always equal to twice its radius. That is, d equals 2r. Since our diameter is 4, we can plug it in for d here. This is 4 equals 2r. Divide both sides by 2 now to get r by itself. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now that we know r is 2, we can plug it in right here. And likewise, we were told to use 3.14 to approximate pi. So that's what we'll do there. This becomes 3.14 times 2 squared. 2 squared is the same thing as 2 times 2, which is 4. So this is 3.14 times 4. All right, let's do this math off to the side if you can't do it mentally. This is 3.14 times 4. We have to move this decimal in 3.14 2 times to the right to rewrite this as 314 times 4, albeit with 2 decimals to move back into the left when we're done. 4 times 4 is 16, carry a 1. 1 times 4 is 4 plus 1 is 5. 3 times 4 is 12. Bring our two decimals back in. We could see that the area of our circle is 12.56 square units, which is answer choice C, of course. This ASVAB PiCAT math knowledge practice test question says if a equals -6 and b equals -5, what is the value of a squared minus b squared all squared? So let's go ahead and start by plugging in -6 for a and -5 for b, respectively. Then let's talk about the order of operations, which is PEMDAS. We want to do parentheses first, exponents next, multiplication and division from left to right, and addition and subtraction from left to right. In this case, we have a set of parentheses. In parentheses, we have exponents and subtraction. We're going to do the exponents first. -6 squared is -6 times -6, which is 36, minus -5 squared, which is -5 times -5, which is 25 squared. We're still working inside parentheses. We took care of our exponents. Let's do our subtraction. 36 minus 25 is 11. 11 squared is 121. So this one is going to be A. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says simplify 3x times -x squared minus x minus 1. So I'm going to start by copying this one down as if I was writing on my own scratch paper, which you will have for the ASVAB and PiCAT. The first thing we have to do is distribute this 3x here, here, and here. And distribute just means multiply. So to start, we have 3x times -x squared. That's going to be -3. And if you haven't multiplied polynomials in a long time, for this one, we have to follow one of the laws of exponents called the product rule. The product rule says if you have a to the m times a to the n, that's equal to a to the m plus n. And we already accounted for the negative and the 3, but we have x. X is the same thing as x to the first times x squared. According to the product rule, this is going to become x to the 1 plus 2 or x to the third. So this is negative 3x to the third. Let's move on to 3x times -x. Again, we have negative times a positive, so it's going to be -3. And if you can't do this one mentally, we have x times x. Again, that's the same thing as x to the first times x to the first. According to the product rule, you add the exponents, so that's x to the 1 plus 1 or x squared. So this is minus 3x squared. And anything times 1 is itself. 3x times -1 is going to be -3x. So just like that, we multiplied this one out using the distributive property, and we can see that the correct answer choice is B. Before you go take the ASVAB and PiCAT, you should not have to write out the product rule like this. You should be able to go straight from here to your answer mentally. So that is that one. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says 6x plus 5y times 3x plus 2y equals. So in this case, you have to know how to multiply this out using the FOIL method. And that says you take this term right here, you multiply it here and here. You take this term and you multiply it here and here. And then you simplify this by combining like terms. So let's get started. 6x times 3x is going to be 18x squared. 6x times 2y is going to be 12xy. Uh, 5y times 3x is going to be 15xy. And then finally, 5y times 2y is going to be 10y squared. All right, let's go ahead and simplify this by combining like terms. We have 18x squared, 12xy, and 15xy are like terms. 12 plus 15 is going to be 27xy. And then finally, we have 10y squared. All right, so this is simplified as much as possible. These all start with 18x plus 27xy plus 27xy plus 10y squared. So this one is clearly B. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says simplify 3x times -x squared minus x minus 1. So to get started, I'm going to copy this one down. We have 3x times -x squared minus x minus 1. And we're going to take 3x and distribute it here, here, and here. 3x times negative x squared, a positive times a negative is going to be a negative 3x to the third. 3x times negative x is going to be negative 3x squared. And negative 3x times negative 1 is negative 3x. So this one is negative 3x to the third minus 3x squared minus 3x, which is answer choice D. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the area of a parallelogram if its base is x plus 3 and its height is x plus 5? As a reminder for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you're not given a reference sheet, so you have to memorize these formulas. And thankfully enough, finding the area of a parallelogram is pretty simple. It's base times height. In this case, our base, according to the problem, is x plus 3, and our height is x plus 5. So all we have to do is multiply this out. You can use the FOIL method, which means you're going to take this x, you're going to multiply it here and here, and you're going to take this 3 and you're going to multiply it here and here. X times x is x squared, x times 5 is 5x, 3 times x is 3x, 3 times 5 is 15. So this becomes x squared, 5x plus 3x is 8x plus 15. So the area of this parallelogram is clearly D, x squared plus 8x plus 15. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says 9 is what percent of 60? So the easiest way to solve this one is to translate this statement into an equation that you can then solve. 9 is in math is equal, so 9 equals what percent? That's unknown, so I'm going to call it P. Oven math is usually multiplication, p times 60. Again, we can solve for p percent by dividing both sides by 60 now. In doing so, this crosses out. This says the percent is equal to 9 divided by 60. And there's a few ways you can go about solving this one. First, I'm going to reduce this by a common factor of 3 to make the numbers a little bit easier to work with. 9 divided by 3 is 3. 60 divided by 3 is 20. Now, to convert 3 over 20 to percent very quickly, I can multiply both of these by a common factor of 5. 3 times 5 is 15. 20 times 5 is 100. 15 over 100 is the same thing as 15%. So this one is B. The other route you can take is you can do 3 divided by 20. That is to say, you could do your long division. 20 doesn't go into 3, so let's add a decimal, and I'm going to add a couple of zero placeholders. How many times does 20 go into 30 without going over? Well, you got to bring up your decimal into your answer. 20 times 1 gets you closest to 30 without going over. 20 times 1 is 20. 30 minus 20 is 10. Bring down this 0. 20 times 5 is exactly 100 with no remainder, so we can stop. You can see that is the same thing as 15%. So regardless of how you solve this one, you get the same answer of 15%. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, if one side of a hexagon is x plus 2, what is its perimeter? So here's a hexagon. As you can see, it's a six-sided figure, and all the sides are equal. If one side's x plus 2, then all these other sides are x plus 2. That said, how do you find the perimeter of a regular polygon, including a hexagon? You add up all of its sides. Instead of doing x plus 2 plus x plus 2 plus x plus 2 6 times, we're going to do 6 times x plus 2. And again, we're just going to take this 6 and multiply it here and here. This becomes 6x plus 12. So the perimeter of a hexagon with one side being x plus 2 is 6x plus 12. Answer choice C in this case. ASVAB PiCAT arithmetic reasoning practice test question says, if the area of one circle is 4 times the area of a smaller circle with a radius of 3 units, what is the radius of the larger circle? So we're talking about circles in area. So to find the area of a circle, it's pi r squared. We're talking about two circles, so I'm going to write down that formula twice. You do have to know this formula for the test. Let's find the area of the smaller circle first. And we know its radius is 3, so this becomes pi times 3 squared. 3 squared is 9, so this is 9 pi. We know this larger circle has 4 times the area of the smaller circle. 4 times 9 pi is 36 pi. This equals pi r squared. Again, we want to know the radius of this larger circle, so we're going to divide by pi here. This crosses out here and here, leaving you with 36 equals r squared. That is the radius squared. We take the square root of both sides, we're left with r. The square root of 36 is 6, so the radius of the bigger circle is b. This arithmetic reasoning practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, if the ratio of the sides of two squares is 3 to 1, what is the ratio of their perimeters? So let's get started with the ratio of their sides. According to the problem, that's 3 to 1. So we can simply say that this side of this square is 3, this side of this square is 1. This gives us a ratio of their sides of 3 to 1. Now we have to find the ratio of their perimeters. And to answer this one, you have to know some properties of squares. Notably, in squares, all the sides are equal. So in other words, if this side's 1, all these other sides are 1. If this side's 3, all these other sides are, of course, 3. Now, how do you find the perimeter of any regular polygon, including a square? It's very simple. You add up all of its sides. So the perimeter of this square is 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 are 4. The perimeter of this square, again, we're just adding up all of its sides. 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, that's going to be 12. What is the ratio of their perimeters? That's going to be 12 to 4. Of course, we can reduce this by a common factor of 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3. 4 divided by 4 is 1. So as you can see, the ratio of their perimeter is 3 to 1, which is the same thing as the ratio of their sides. So this one is D. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is 12 over 75 in simplest form? So in other words, we're trying to reduce the fraction 12 over 75. We're looking for a common factor that is a number that goes into both 12 and 75. And if you think about it hard enough, you should say that 3 goes into both 12 and 75. Since 12 divided by 3 is 4, 75 divided by 3 is 25. Can we reduce this any further? We cannot. So the correct answer to this one is C, 4 over 25. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says solve the inequality negative 3y is greater than or equal to 21 plus 6. So we have negative 3y greater than or equal to 21 plus 6. So to get started, we can combine 21 and 6. 21 and 6 is going to be 27. All right, so we're going to be solving this inequality for y. So the next thing we're going to do is divide both sides by negative 3. Now, whenever you multiply or divide across the inequality sign by a negative value, that's going to prompt you to change the direction of the sign. In this case, I divided across the inequality by a negative 3, so I'm going to change the direction of its sign. This crosses out, leaving you with y on this side. 27 divided by negative 3. A positive divided by a negative is going to be a negative. 27 divided by 3 is 9. So this is y is less than or equal to negative 9, which is going to be answer choice C. Again, remember, if you multiply or divide across the inequality sign by a negative value, that prompts you to change the direction of its sign. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, which of the values of z would not satisfy the inequality 3 minus z greater than 7? So let's solve this inequality algebraically for z. We have 3 minus z greater than 7. To get started, we're going to get z by itself by subtracting 3 from both sides. This crosses out, leaving you with negative z on this side. Greater than 7 minus 3 is 4. Again, we're trying to find the values of z, not negative z. So to clear this negative in front of z, we're going to divide both sides of this inequality by negative 1. Now, as far as inequalities are concerned, you need to know this. Whenever you multiply or divide across the inequality sign by a negative value, that's going to prompt you to change the direction of the sign or flip it. In this case, I divided both sides by negative 1. So my next step is to flip the direction of the inequality sign. Again, a negative divided by a negative is a positive, so this just becomes positive z over here. 4 divided by negative 1 is going to be negative 4. Again, a positive divided by a negative is a negative. So let's solve this one visually. We're going to plot this on a line graph here. We're going to go to negative 4. So this is negative 3, negative 2, negative 1. -5, -6, -7, and so on and so forth. We're going to go to -4, which is right here. Since this is less than, we're going to put an open circle above -4 so as not to include -4 in our solution. And z is all the values that are less than -4. So that's going to be -5, -6, and -7, and so on and so forth. So we put an arrow above all those values to show that they're included in our solution. So -10 works, -6 works, and -5 works. -3 is not included in our solution set. So the correct answer to this one is D. -3 does not satisfy this inequality. You can see that visually down here, but if you want to see it algebraically, let's go ahead and see what that looks like. We have 3 minus z greater than 7, and we're saying in this case, z is -3. So let's plug in -3 for z. This becomes 3 minus -3 greater than 7. Minus minus becomes plus. 3 plus 3 is 6. Is 6 greater than 7? It is not. So therefore, we know -3 does not satisfy this inequality. Again, we saw it visually down here, and we just saw it algebraically over here. So that is that one. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says simplify 4 over 9x plus x. In other words, we want to add or combine these like terms. Again, like terms have the same letter variables raised to the same power. And as a quick reminder on the actual ASVAB and PiCAT, you will not have a calculator or a reference sheet, but you will have scratch paper. The first thing I want to do to make this one a little bit clearer is to put a 1 in front of x. Typically in algebra, you do not place a 1 in front of a letter variable. It's implied that it's there, but in this case, again, we want to combine these two like terms. And now that I know there's a 1 in front of x, I can actually write this as 9 over 9x. 9 divided by 9 is 1, and 1x is the same thing as just x. And now what do we have? We have uh, coefficients that have the same denominator, which means if you want to see this off to the side, we could do 4 over 9 plus 9 over 9. That is to say we're adding two fractions now. To add fractions, they have to have the same denominator, which I just did right here. So this is going to be 9. 4 plus 9 is 13. So this is 13 over 9x, which as you can see is answer choice C. So again, this is testing your knowledge of coefficients as well as combining like terms. And that is that one. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says simplify 25x to the fourth y to the third z over 5xyz. So in this case, we're simplifying this expression. And in order to do that, we have to know one of the laws of exponents, notably the quotient rule, which says this. If you have a to the m over a to the n, that's equal to a to the m minus n. If the exponent is positive, it goes in the numerator. If it's negative, it goes in the denominator, and you make the exponent positive. So let's get started. 25 divided by 5 is 5. Now, XYZ, technically X is raised to the first power, Y is raised to the first power, and Z is also raised to the first power. Generally speaking, if something's raised to the first power, you do not write the 1 there in algebra. So let's get started with x to the fourth over x to the first. Again, we have x to the fourth over x to the first. According to the quotient rule, what are we going to do? We're going to subtract their exponents. This is 4 minus 1. This becomes x to the third. Again, our exponent's positive, so it's going to go up here in our numerator. Let's do our y's now. We have y to the third over y to the first. What does our quotient rule say? It says to subtract your exponents. So this is y to the 3 minus 1, which is y squared. So this is y squared here. Now let's look at our z's. Again, this is not raised to any power, so we assume it's raised to the first power. We have z to the first power over z to the first power. According to the quotient rule, that's going to be z to the 1 minus 1, which is z to the 0. Anything raised to the 0 power is just 1. So we could do times 1 here, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to include that because All of this times 1 is just itself, so we do not have to write that 1 there. You can see our answer is 5x to the third y squared, which is answer choice B, of course. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says if 6 to the x power equals 216, then x equals. So in other words, we want to know what power we have to raise 6 to in order for it to equal 216. And the way you could do this is by brute force. 6 to the first power, anything raised to the first power is itself, so that's just 6. 6 squared is the same thing as 6 times 6. 6 times 6 is 36, of course. 6 to the third power is 6 times 6 times 6. 6 times 6 is 36. What is 36 times 6? Well, do it off to the side if you can't do it mentally. 6 times 6 is 36, carry a 3. 6 times 3 is 18, 19, 20, 21. So 6 to the third power, as you can see, is 216. So x must be B3. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the area of a triangle with a base of 12 inches and a height of 6 inches? So as a quick reminder, you're not permitted to use a calculator or a reference sheet on the ASVAB or PiCAT. That said, you have to know a lot of basic formulas from geometry, including how to find the area of a triangle. That's area equals 1/2 base times height, of course. In this case, according to the problem, the base is going to be 12 and the height is going to be 6. So let's plug those in and solve accordingly. This becomes 1/2 times 12 times 6. And the easiest way to do this one is to take this 1/2 and multiply it by 12 to get started. You should be able to do that mentally. 1/2 times 12 is 6, so this becomes 6 times 6. If you can't do 1/2 times 12 mentally, you're probably on the struggle bus a little bit, but that's it. I'll do it off to the side very quickly. 1/2 times 12. You could write 12 as a fraction by placing it over 1. Now we're multiplying two fractions, so you're going to multiply straight across. 12 times 1 is 12. 2 times 1 is 2. 12 divided by 2 is 6. Uh, and here we just have 6 times 6, which is 36. So the area of this triangle is clearly B, 36 square inches. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says in the formula C equals 5/9 times F minus 32. If C equals 25, then F equals. So in other words, we're going to be converting from Celsius to Fahrenheit. So we're going to start by plugging in 25 for C. So this becomes 25 equals 5/9 times F minus 32. The first thing we want to do is clear this 5/9 in front of the parentheses. And to do that, we're going to multiply both sides of this equation by the reciprocal of 5/9, notably by 9 over 5. In so doing, this crosses out here, leaving you with just F minus 32 over here. Now we got 9 over 5 times 25. I can write 25 as a fraction by placing it over 1. That enables me to cross reduce very quickly. 5 goes into 5 one time, 5 goes into 25 5 times. This is 9 over 1, which is just 9, times 5 over 1, which is just 5. 9 times 5, you should know, is 45. So this is 45 equals F minus 32. To get F by itself, we're just going to add 32 to both sides now. This crosses out, leaving you with F over here. Uh, 5 plus 2 is 7. 4 plus 3 is 7. So Fahrenheit in this case is 77 degrees. So the answer to this one is A, of course. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says simplify the cube root of 9 times 24. So to get started, I'm going to do 24 times 9 very quickly. 4 times 9 is 36, carry a 3. 2 times 9 is 18, plus 3 is 21. So this is the cube root of 216. Now for the ASVAB and PiCAT, I'd encourage you to memorize your cube roots of 1 to 10 because you can see that the cube root of 216 is simply 6. Now, let me explain why that is the case, and let's take a look at something else very quickly. Let's say I asked you to rewrite a squared, the cube root of a squared, using exponents. Well, you could write this as a. You take this 2, you put it in your numerator. You take this 3, you put it in your denominator. Well, why is this important? Cube root means something multiplied by itself equals that number. Well, 6 times 6 times 6. 6 times 6 is 36. 36 times 6 is 216. 6 times 6 times 6 is 6 to the third. So, in other words, the cube root of 216 is the same thing as the cube root of 6 to the third. Well, let's rewrite this like we did down here. This is 6. This 3 is going to go in our numerator. This index of 3 is going to go in our denominator. 3 divided by 3 is 1. This is 6 to the first. Anything raised to the first power is just that number. So that's how we arrived at the answer 6. Again, you don't have to know all this part right here for the ASVAB as long as you commit these common cube roots to memory. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says this: cube root of 27 minus the square root of 9. So, how do you find the cube root of a number? Well, here's the definition of a cube root: it's a number which, when multiplied by itself 3 times, equals another number. So, in other words, to find the cube root of 27, we're looking for a number that, when multiplied by itself 3 times, equals 27. How about 3? Does that work? 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. So, the cube root of 27 is 3 minus the square root of 9. The square root of 9 is 3. 3 minus 3 is 0. So, this one is going to be A0. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, if the diameter of a circle is 25 units, what is its radius? So for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you do have to know some things about circles, including the parts of the circle, as well as how to find the area and circumference of a circle. As far as the parts of a circle are concerned, here's the center point of the circle. The distance from the center point to the edge is called the radius, and the distance across the circle and through the center point is called the diameter. As it happens, the diameter of a circle is always twice as long as its radius. That is, d, diameter, is 2 times its radius. In this case, we were told our diameter is 25, and we want to solve for its radius. So we're going to divide both sides of this equation by 2. 25 divided by 2. Many of you could do that mentally, but if you can't, do 25 divided by 2 off to the side. 2 goes into 2 one time. 2 times 1 is 2. Uh, 2 minus 2 is 0, but we got to drop down this 5. 2 goes into 5 2 times without going over. 2 times 2 is 4. 5 minus 4 is 1. How are we going to proceed? Well, we're going to add a decimal. We're going to bring that decimal into our answer. We're going to add a 0 placeholder and drop that 0 down here. 2 times 5 is exactly 10, so we have no remainder. So we can see that the radius of this circle is going to be B12.5 units if its diameter is 25 units. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, which equation of a line contains the point negative 3, 2 and is parallel to y equals negative 2x minus 1? So first of all, this equation of our line is given in slope-intercept form. That is y equals mx plus b, where m is your slope and b is your y-intercept. We can see that the slope is negative 2. Now, parallel lines have slopes that are the same or equal, whereas perpendicular lines have slopes that are negative reciprocals of each other. So let's go through these answer choices and identify our slopes. In A, we can see our slope is negative 2. So this is a possible answer choice. In B, our slope is right here. It's 1. So this is not a possible answer choice. In C, our slope is positive 2. So this isn't a possible answer choice. And in D, our slope is negative 2. So this is another possible answer choice. Now, to find which of these is the correct answer choice, we're going to use this information about the point negative 3, 2 being on the line. If this point is on the line, when we plug it into our equation of a line, it should make a true statement. If it makes a true statement, that point's on the line. If it doesn't make a true statement, then that point is not on the line. Again, this is our x value, this is our y value. So I'm going to plug in 2 for y minus 2 times negative 3 for x minus 4. 2 equals negative 2 times negative 3. A negative times a negative is a positive. So this is 6 minus 4. This is 2 equals 6 minus 4 is 2. Since this made a true statement in this equation here, which is answer choice A, we know that the point negative 3, 2 is on the equation of the line y equals negative 2x minus 4. And as we saw previously, this has a slope that is parallel to this equation of a line. All right, so that is that one. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says which equation's graph has a slope of 2/3 and a y-intercept of 0, -2. So first of all, we're talking about equations of lines. More often than not, they're given in slope-intercept form, which looks like this: y equals mx plus b, where m is your slope and b is your y-intercept. So let's fill this in with the information that we want. We want our equation of a line to have a slope of 2/3, so m is going to be 2/3, and we want its intercept to be 0, -2. In other words, we want b to be -2. In other words, our equation of a line has to look like this: y equals 2/3 x minus 2. So that is what we want to see. And we're going to go through our answer choices and rewrite these until we find one that matches this. Let's start with answer choice D here. Again, for D, we have 3x plus 2y equals -2. Again, we want to write this such that we get y by itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 3x from both sides. In doing so, this crosses out, leaving you with 2y over here equals -3x minus 2. Again, to get y by itself, we're going to divide everything by 2. This crosses out, leaving you with y equals -3 over 2x minus 2 divided by 2, which is 1. Does this equation of the line match what we want according to the problem? It does not. Their slopes are not the same, and the y-intercept is not the same. Let's go ahead and check answer choice A. Again, that says 2x minus 3y equals 6. Let's get y by itself by first moving 2x to the other side via subtraction. In doing so, that crosses out, leaving you with -3y equals -2x plus 6. To get y by itself, we're going to divide everything by -3. This crosses out, leaving you with y equals a negative divided by a negative is going to become a positive. So this is 2/3 x. Uh, 6 divided by -3 is going to be -2. Again, a positive divided by a negative is a negative. Does this equation of a line match what we were told to find in the question? Y equals 2/3 x minus 2. It does. Therefore, we know A is the correct answer. Solve this ASVAB math knowledge practice test question in 60 seconds. It says, what is the value of 5 factorial? To answer this one, you have to know what factorial means. Factorial means take the number that's given, multiply it by every number that's less than the given number until you get to 1. So for instance, 3 factorial is equal to 3 times 2 times 1. Let's apply this to 5 factorial. That's going to be equal to 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Let's work this out mentally. It's not that hard to do. 5 times 4, of course, is 20. 20 times 3 is 60. 60 times 2 is 120. 120 times 1 is going to be 120. So the answer to this one is D, 120. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says simplify 5 factorial over 4 factorial. Now, if you don't know what a factorial is, you'd be somewhat hard pressed to get started with this one. So let me explain how factorials work. Let's say I wanted you to simplify the expression 3 factorial. Well, what this factorial symbol means is you take the number that's given. So we're given the number 3. We're going to multiply 3 by every number that's less than 3 until we get to 1. And then we just multiply this out. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times 1 is 6. So 3 factorial is 6 in other words. 4 factorial likewise would be 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And you can multiply that out to get your answer. Now let's take a look at the expression 5 factorial over 4 factorial. Uh, 5 factorial is the same thing as 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. 4 factorial is the same thing as 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. What can we do to make this math a little bit easier so we're not multiplying everything out? Well, we can cross out the corresponding values in our numerator and denominator. So these 4s can be crossed out, these 3s can be crossed out, these 2s can be crossed out, and these 1s can be crossed out. That just leaves us with 5. So the expression 5 factorial over 4 factorial simplifies to simply be 5. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says factor x squared minus 11x plus 24. Since this has a leading coefficient of 1, if we can factor it, it's going to look like this: x times x in parentheses. Of course, our goal here is to find two numbers that multiply to positive 24 but add to negative 11. Now, many of you could do this mentally, and you should get to the point where you could do this mentally for the ASVAB and PiCAT. That said, if you can't do it mentally, just list out the factors of 24. For example, 12 and 2, negative 12 and negative 2, 8 and 3, and negative 8, negative 3, 6 and 4, and so on and so forth. Again, we're looking for two numbers that multiply to 24 but add to negative 11. 12 times 2 is 24. 12 plus 2 is 14, not negative 11. So these won't work. Negative 12 times negative 2 is positive 24. Negative 12 plus negative 2 is negative 14, not negative 11. So these won't work. 8 times 3 is 24. 8 plus 3 is 11. We want negative 11, not positive 11. So these won't work. Negative 8 times negative 3 is 24. Again, a negative times a negative is a positive. Negative 8 plus negative 3 is negative 11. So negative 8 and negative 3 multiply to 24 and add to negative 11. So those are the two numbers we're going to put in parentheses here. That'll be minus 8 minus 3. So just like that, we factored this one, and you can see the answer choice is C. As I said, you really should not have to list out the factors like this to solve this. You should be able to do this mentally before you get ready to take the ASVAB and PiCAT. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what are the factors of 2x squared plus xy minus 3y squared? So this is somewhat of a challenging factoring problem. And in order to factor this one, we're going to use a method called the AC method. Again, we're dealing with a trinomial here. So this 2 is going to be our A. This 1 in front of the xy is going to be our B. And this negative 3 is going to be our C. The AC method says take A, multiply it by C. 2 times negative 3 is going to be negative 6. Identify B. B is 1 as we discussed previously. We're looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 6, but add to positive 1. That's going to be negative 2 and 3. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Negative 2 plus 3 is positive 1. All right, so we identified our two numbers. And now what we're going to do, I'm going to copy down the original equation very quickly. 2x squared plus xy minus 3y squared. Now we're going to take these two numbers and we're going to use them to replace this middle term right here, such that we can then factor this one via grouping. So this becomes 2x squared minus 2xy plus 3xy. You can see I replaced the negative 2 here and the 3 here, minus 3y squared. Now to factor by grouping, we're going to kind of split this apart in our mind, and I'm going to focus on these first two terms. We have 2x squared minus 2xy. From that, I can factor out a 2x. That leaves me with x minus y in parentheses. Now let's look at these next two terms. We have 3xy minus 3y squared. What can I factor out of that? I can factor out a 3y, and that leaves me with x minus y in parentheses. And the goal of factoring by grouping is to get the same terms in parentheses. You can see we have x minus y here and x minus y here. So our solution to this one is going to be 2x plus 3y. And we're just going to bring down one of these x minus y's that repeats. And just like that, we factored this one using the AC method. You can see that the answer is going to be B, 2x plus 3y times x minus y. You should be expected to use the AC method on the ASVAB and PiCAT, but this is a more challenging problem. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says simplify e to the ax times e to the negative ax minus e to the 2ax. So I'm going to start by copying this one down. Again, on the actual ASVAB and PiCAT, you will have scratch paper and you will be able to copy things down that you need to work out. And in this case, I do want to copy this one down as is. Next, I want to point out that we have multiplication here and subtraction here. According to the order of operations, PEMDAS, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, we're always going to do multiplication before subtraction. So in other words, we're multiplying e to the ax times e to the negative ax. In order to perform that multiplication, you also have to know one of the laws of exponents, notably the product rule. The product rule says if you have a to the m times a to the n, that's equal to a to the m plus n. That is to say, you add their exponents. And in this case, right here, we have e to the ax times e to the negative ax. According to the product rule, this is going to become e to the ax plus negative ax. This is the same thing as ax minus ax, which is 0. So this is e to the 0. You also have to know that anything raised to the 0 power is always going to be 1. So for example, 5 to the 0 power would be 1. 100 to the 0 power is going to be 1. And likewise, e to the 0 power is 1. So we can replace e to the ax times e to the negative ax with simply 1 minus e to the 2ax. We can't simplify this expression any further, so that is our answer. We can see it's C, 1 minus e to the 2ax. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, if a square has an area of 64 square units, what is its perimeter? So we're talking about the area as well as the perimeter of a square. You have to know both of these formulas for this test. The area of a square is its side length squared, that is s squared. The perimeter of a square is 4 times one of its side lengths, s. Well, in this case, we were told the area of our square, a, is 64 square units. So we could go ahead and plug in 64 for a, and we can actually solve this for s, which we can then plug in down here for s and get our answer. Again, to get rid of this square on s, we're going to do the opposite operation. We're going to take the square root of both sides. This crosses out, leaving us with s over here. Square root of 64 is 8. Now that we know s is 8, we can plug it into the perimeter formula. 4 times 8 is 32. So its perimeter is b, 32 units. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says the perimeter of a square and a rectangle is the same. If a length of the rectangle is 20 centimeters and the width is 12 centimeters, find the area of the square. So in this case, we have to know how to find the perimeter of a rectangle. That's going to be 2 times its length plus 2 times its width. We have to know how to find the perimeter of a square. That's 4 times its side length s. And we have to know how to find the area of a square. That's its side length squared. So we're going to go from finding the perimeter of the rectangle to finding the perimeter of a square, more specifically its side length s, to finding the area of the square. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, we're told that the rectangle has a length of 20 and a width of 12. So its perimeter is going to be 20 times 2, which is 40, plus 12 times 2, which is 24. 40 plus 24 is going to be 64. Again, according to the problem, the perimeter of the rectangle and square is the same. So if the perimeter of this rectangle is 64, the perimeter of this square is also going to be 64. And now we can solve for s by dividing both sides by 4, of course. 64 divided by 4. If you can't do that mentally, do it off to the side. 64 divided by 4. 4 goes into 6 one time without going over. 4 times 1 is 4. 6 minus 4 is 2. Drop down this 4. 4 times 6 is exactly 24 with no remainder. So the side length of our square is 16. Now we can find the area of the square. This becomes 16 squared. 16 squared is the same thing as 16 times 16. If you can't do that mentally, I'll work it off to the side, of course. 6 times 6 is going to be 36, so bring down a 6, carry a 3. 1 times 6 is 6, plus 3 is going to be 9. Add a 0 placeholder before we get started with this second row of multiplication. 1 times 6 is 6. 1 times 1 is 1. Let's add this all up. This is 6 plus 0, or 6. 9 plus 6 is going to be 15, carry a 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. So the area of our square is clearly D, 256 centimeters squared. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the prime factorization of 150? So in order to find the prime factorization of 150, we have to first know what a prime number is. Again, a prime number is defined as a number that's only divisible by 1 in itself, and that does not include 1. So the first few prime numbers are 2, 3, 5, 7, and 11. So in other words, we're going to use a factor tree as well as these prime numbers to find the prime factorization of 150. So let's get started. Uh, what prime number can we multiply by something to get 150? What about 5, which is prime, times 30? 5 times 30 is 150. All right, so now we're going to break down 30. What prime number can we use to break down 30? What about 3 times 10? 3 times 10 is 30. Now let's break down 10. What two prime numbers can we multiply together to get 10? What about 5 and 2? 5 times 2 is 10. Both of those are prime. So our prime factorization is going to be 5 times 3 times 5 times 2. And we usually write that from least to greatest. So it's going to look like this. 2 times 3 times 5 times 5. If we multiply this out very quickly, what do we get? 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 5 is 30. 30 times 5 is 150. We can see that this is not an answer choice because, again, what is 5 times 5? 5 times 5 is the same thing as 5 squared. So this is 2 times 3 times 5 squared. So our prime factorization is B, 2 times 3 times 5 squared. And again, if you don't want to use the factor tree to figure this one out, you can quickly multiply all this out and it will get you 150. 2 times 3 times 5 squared. 2 times 3 is 6. 5 squared is 5 times 5 are 25. 6 times 25 is 150. Therefore, I'm confident that we identified the correct prime factorization of 150. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says which number is prime. So here are the prime numbers from 1 to 100. As you can see, 1 is never considered prime. And we can see that 2 is prime. Well, how do we know that 2 is prime? A number is considered prime if it's only divisible by 1 in itself. So 2 only has two factors, notably 2 and 1, that is 1 in itself. But that said, how do we quickly know that 57 and 87 are divisible by something other than 1 in itself? Well, you have to know your divisibility rules. The divisibility rule for 2 says if the last digit in the number is even, then that number is divisible by 2 and can't be prime. Both of these end in 7, which is odd, so we can't use this divisibility rule. The divisibility rule for 5 says if the last digit ends in 0 or 5, then that number is divisible by 5 and can't be prime. These are both 7. And the divisibility rule for 3 says sum the digits. If the sum of the digits is divisible by 3, then the number itself is divisible by 3. So for example, here we have 5 and 7. Our digits are 5 and 7. When we add those up, we get 12. Is 12 divisible by 3? It is. 12 divided by 3 is 4. Since the sum of the digits in 57 is divisible by 3. I know 57 is divisible by 3. What about 87? Again, sum the digits. Our digits are 8 and 7. 8 and 7 is 15. Is 15 divisible by 3? It is. 15 divided by 3 is 5. Since the sum of the digits is divisible by 3, I know 87 is also divisible by 3 and therefore cannot be prime. All right, so that is that one. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the reciprocal of 6 and 1/5? So the first thing you want to do before we talk about finding the reciprocal is to find the improper equivalent of 6 and 1/5. And the way you do that is you do 6 times 5, which is 30 plus 1. So that's going to be 31 over 5. This is the improper fraction equivalent of 6 and 1/5. Now let's talk about finding the reciprocal of this improper fraction. It's very simple to do. All you do is exchange your numerator and denominator. So in other words, it's going to be 5 over 31. So in other words, the reciprocal of 6 and 1/5, which is the same thing as 31 over 5, is going to be 5 over 31. So this one is going to be A. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says determine the next two numbers in the series. This one may take a minute to figure out, but in order to get from term to term or number to number in this series, you simply add the two preceding numbers. So to get to this one, we do 0 plus 1. Again, 0 plus 1 is 1. To get to this 2, we do 1 plus 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. To get to this 3, we do 1 plus 2. 1 plus 2 is 3. To get to 5, we do 2 plus 3, which is 5. To get to 8, we add the two preceding numbers, notably 3 and 5. And so to get to this missing number, we're going to add the two preceding numbers. Those are 5 and 8. 5 plus 8 is 13, so this is 13. And to get to this final missing number, we're going to add the two preceding numbers, notably 8 and 13. 8 plus 13 is 21. So that is that one. And we can see that the answer choice here is going to be B. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says which of the following pairs of numbers represents a perfect square and its square root. So for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you have to know your perfect squares and square roots. I would say at least from 1 to 20. In this column of this chart right here, we have our perfect squares. And in this column right here, we have our square roots. Let's start with 16. You can see that 16 is a perfect square because 4 squared is 16. That said, the square root of 16 is simply 4, not the square root of 8. So that's not correct. And you can see that right here. Let's move on to 25. You can see 25's right here. You should know that 5 squared is 25. That said, the square root of 25 is just 5, not the square root of 5. And again, you can see that the square root of 25 is 5 right there. Let's move on to 27. 27 is not a perfect square. 3 to the third is 27, but that's a cube, not a square. This 3 is a cube. So that's not correct. That means by process of elimination, we know D is correct. You can see that 169 is a perfect square. 13 squared is 169. The square root of 169 is 13. And you can see that right there. All right, so this one is D. I would commit this chart to memory. That said, you should know most of these already from 1 to 10. It'll probably take you a little bit to learn the ones from 10 to 20, but they're worth knowing for this test, especially if you want to get a high score. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the square root of 9 times the square root of 64? Now, for the ASVAB and PiCAT, I strongly encourage you to memorize your square roots from 1 to 20. And in this example, you should automatically know that the square root of 9 is 3. Likewise, you should automatically know that the square root of 64 is 8. So this is 3 times 8, which you should know is 24. So this one is going to be B, of course. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the solution xy to the given system of equations? So as far as system of equations go, you can solve them one or two ways. Most people solve them using the elimination method. That said, in some cases like this one, it's easier to use the substitution method. Again, our system of equations is right here, and I'm actually going to rewrite this bottom equation just to say x equals 5y, because that's going to prompt me to take this 5y, again, it says x equals 5y, and plug it in to this x value right here that is substituted in, and that becomes 5y plus y equals 18. And we can actually solve this equation for y now. 5y plus y is 6y equals 18. We're We're going to divide both sides by 6. This crosses out, leaving you with y. 18 divided by 6 is 3. So we know y is 3. Let's solve for x, even though it's pretty obvious as to what the correct answer choice is. Again, to solve for x, now that we know what y is, we can plug in 3 wherever we see y in either of these two original equations. I'm going to plug it in right there. This becomes 5. Again, y is 3 equals x. 5 times 3 is 15 equals x. So x in this case equals 15. So we know our x value there is 15, and therefore our solution is 15.3a. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says express 62 million in scientific notation. So on the actual ASVAB, you will have scratched paper, and for a problem like this, it's a good idea to copy it down. Again, when we're trying to write 62 million in scientific notation, it's going to look like this: 6.2 times 10 to some power. How do we determine what this power is? Well, we're going to write 62 million as 6.2, so the decimal is going to be there. Right now, the decimal is at the end of 62 million. So all we have to do is count how many times we have to move this decimal from the end of 62 million to get to 6.2, and that will be our power. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we had to move the decimal place 7 times to get the decimal from here to here. So this is 6.2 times 10 to the 7th, which is answer choice C, of course. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says the coordinates of point A and B are 1, 5 and negative 1, 5 respectively. What is the slope of the line that connects the 2 points? Again, for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you're not permitted to use a calculator or reference sheet, so you have to know the formula to calculate slope. That is m, slope equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Where do you get x1, y1, x2, y2 from? Those are the values in your ordered pairs that are given. This is x1, y1, x2, y2. And all we have to do is plug those in and do some basic arithmetic here. Y2 is negative 5 minus y1 is 5 over x2. It's right here. It's negative 1. X1 is right there. It's 1. All right, let's work this out. Negative 5 minus 5 is negative 10. Negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2. Uh, a negative divided by a negative is going to be a positive, so we can cross these out to a positive. 10 divided by 2 is going to be 5. So the slope of the points of the line that connects the 2 points, 1, 5 and negative 1, negative 5, is C5. This math knowledge practice test question says how many minutes are there in 1 week? So for this one, you have to know that there are 7 days in 1 week, and there are 24 hours in 1 day. So if there are 7 days in a week and 24 hours in a day, there are 24 times 7 hours in a week. 4 times 7 is 28. Bring down an 8, carry a 2. 7 times 2 is 14, plus 2 is 16. So there are 168 hours in a week. What else do you need to know to convert this to minutes? You have to know that there are 60 minutes in every hour. So if there are 168 hours in a week, there are 168 times 60 minutes in a week. 0 times these three is going to give you 3 zeros. Before we start multiplication with the 6, we have to add a 0 placeholder. 6 times 8 is going to be 48, carry a 4. 6 times 6 is 36, plus 4 is 40, carry a 4. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 4 is 10. Add this together. This is going to be 10,080 minutes in a 7-day week, since there are 24 hours in a day, 168 hours in a week, and 60 minutes in an hour. So this one is A. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says the diameter of a circle measures 57.3 centimeters. What is the diameter of the circle in meters? So this is not a geometry problem. Instead, it's a conversion problem where we have to convert from centimeters to meters. That is to say, we're converting between metric units. This is something that you have to know for the ASVAB and PiCAT since you're not given a reference sheet or a calculator on test day. And I included this chart for reference. Converting between metric units is actually very simple because they tell you exactly what to do. First of all, you have to understand that to go from a bigger unit to a smaller unit, such as kilometers to meters, you're always going to be multiplying from meters to centimeters, you multiply. From centimeters to millimeters, you multiply. Likewise, to go from a smaller unit to a bigger unit, you're going to divide accordingly. That said, these units tell you exactly what to do. Kilo means 1,000. So to go from kilometers to meters, you multiply by 1,000. Centi means 100. So to go from meters to centimeters, you multiply by 100, and so on and so forth. So in this case, to go from centimeters to meters, you're going to divide by 100. So that's what we're going to do here. Now, we're not going to work this out like long division because we're dividing by a power of 10. And so that's just going to prompt us to change our decimal here by shifting it either left or right, according to how many zeros there are in the power of 10. In 100, there are two zeros. So that's going to prompt us to take this decimal and move it two times to the left. So there are 0.573 meters and 57.3 centimeters. So the answer to this one is A 0.573. ASVAB PiCAT Math Knowledge Practice Test question says graphs of the following equations represent straight lines excluding. So here's all of the equations of lines. Let's take these one by one. 3x plus 2y equals 8. We can see that that is an equation of a line in standard form. Y equals x over 4 minus 5. That's an equation of a line in slope-intercept form. X equals 2. That is a equation of a line that's a vertical line, so that is a line as well. Then finally, y equals 2x squared minus 2. As it happens, this is a parabola. So to quickly identify an equation that is not a line, you want to look at that x variable. And if that x variable is raised to some power other than 1, you know you don't have an equation of a line. So this one is D. Again, if this was a 3, your graph would look like this. If this was 1/2, your graph would look different. It would not be an equation of this math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is an equation of the graph shown? So in other words, we have to use this graph to write an equation of a line. And of course, you should know that the most common equation for a line is slope-intercept form. That is y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope and b is the y-intercept. Let's talk about the slope for a minute. That is m. We can see that as we go from left to right, this line decreases. So that means our slope is going to be negative. So let's look through our answer choices. The slope in A is -2, so that's a negative slope. This is a possible answer choice. The slope in B is x, that's +1. This cannot be an answer choice. We have a negative slope here. The slope in C is -1. You can see that there's a negative in front of the x, so this is a possible answer choice. And the slope in D is 2. That's positive, so this is not a possible answer choice. Now let's talk about the y-intercept, that is B. B is the point at which this line intersects the y-axis here, and it may be hard to see, but it does that right at -8. So we know B in this case is -8. All right, so the only other thing we need to write this equation of our line is our slope. And we can calculate that very quickly by saying m, slope, is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Where do we get the values x1, y1, x2, y2 from? We get those values from any 2 points on this line. So right here is the point -8, 0. I'm going to let that be x1, y1. And right here at our y-intercept is the point 0, -8. I'm going to let that be x2, y2. So let's just plug those values in and get our slope. Again, y2 is -8, so this is -8, minus y1, that's 0, over x2. X2 is right here, it's 0, minus x1, it's right here, it's -8. All right, let's solve this. Uh, -8 minus 0 is -8. 0 minus -8, a negative minus a negative becomes a positive. So 0 minus negative 8 becomes 0 plus 8, or just positive 8. Again, a negative divided by a positive is going to be a negative. Specifically, negative 8 divided by 8 is negative 1. So we know our slope is negative 1. So this is negative 1x minus 8. Again, in algebra, you don't write that 1 in front of x. So this is negative x minus 8. And we can see that that is, in fact, answer choice C in this case. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says if x equals 2 and y equals negative 5, then x times y squared equals. So again, we're trying to evaluate the expression x times y squared when x equals 2 and y equals negative 5. So we're going to plug in 2 for x and negative 5 for y. And in this case, when you plug them in, you want to use parentheses so it's very clear as to what operations you're going to perform and where the negative sign goes more importantly. So this becomes 2 times negative 5 squared. According to the order of operations, that is PEMDAS, you're always going to do exponents before you do multiplication. So in other words, we got to work out negative 5 squared. Negative 5 squared is the same thing as negative 5 times negative 5. A negative times a negative is going to be a positive. So negative 5 times negative 5 is going to be positive 25. So this becomes 2 times 25. 2 times 25 is 50. So the answer to this one is D, 50. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says if x equals y, what is the value of 5 plus 10 times x minus y? So we're not given values of x or y, so we're going to come up with our own, and we want to come up with any value that's going to be easy to work with. So I'm going to let x be 1, and if x equals y, that means y is also 1. Again, you could use any value for x and y, it will come out the same. I'm just picking the easiest values to work with in my opinion. So again, we have 5 plus 10 times x minus y. Now that we assign values to x and y, this expression becomes very easy to simplify. Again, let's work this out. This becomes 5 plus 10. What is x? We let x be 1, and we let likewise y be 1. Now, to simplify this expression, we're always going to follow the order of operations, that is PEMDAS. We're going to do what's in parentheses first, exponents if there are any, multiplication and division as they appear from left to right, and addition and subtraction as it appears from left to right. In this case, we have parentheses, so we'll work on those parentheses first. This becomes 5 plus 10. 1 minus 1 is 0. All right, we took care of our parentheses. What do we have left? We have multiplication, 10 times 0 plus 5. So we're going to do multiplication before addition. 10 times 0 is just 0, so this is 5 plus 0. 5 plus nothing is 5. So this one is C5. Again, come up with any values that you want, plug them in, and simplify the expression according to the order of operations. And if you do your math correctly, you're going to get the same result. I could let x be 1 million and y be 1 million. This would work out the same way. ASVAB PiCAT Math Knowledge Practice Test question says if x equals 4, which expression does not equal 9? So we're going to take 4 and plug it in for x in each of these expressions and see which of them does not equal 9. 4 minus negative 5 minus minus becomes plus 4 plus 5 is 9, so that checks out. Then we just have 4 plus 5, which does equal 9, so that one checks out. 2 times 4 plus 1, that's 8 plus 1, which is 9. So that does work. And then finally we have 4 minus 15. 4 minus 15 is going to be negative 11. So this one is going to be D. That expression does not equal 9. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says if a equals 3 and b equals 2, what is the value of a squared minus b squared to the third power? So we're going to be evaluating the expression a squared minus b squared to the third power when a equals 3 and b equals 2. Let's start by plugging those values in accordingly. This becomes 3 squared minus 2 squared to the third power. 3 squared is the same thing as 3 times 3, which is 9. 2 squared is the same thing as 2 times 2, which is 4. 9 minus 4 is going to be 5. So this is 5 to the third power. That means you're going to take 5 and you're going to multiply it by itself 3 times. 5 times 5 is 25. What is 25 times 5? You should be able to do that mentally. 25 times 4 would be 100. Just tack on 25. That's going to be 125. That said, you could always do it off to the side very quickly. 5 times 5 is 25. Carry a 2. 5 times 2 is 10 plus 2 is 12. So the answer to this one is B, 125. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the product of the reciprocals of 1 and 1/3, 1/4, and 2? So product means we're going to be multiplying all these reciprocals together. So the first thing we have to do is find the reciprocal of 1 and 1/3, 1/4, and 2 respectively. Let's start with the easiest one first. To find the reciprocal of 1/4, you just exchange its numerator and denominator. So in other words, the reciprocal of 1/4 is simply 4 over 1. I'm going to put a box around it to remind me that that is in fact the reciprocal that I'll eventually be multiplying with these other reciprocals. I could write 2 as a fraction by placing it over 1. Again, to find its reciprocal, we're just going to flip-flop our numerator and denominator. So the reciprocal of 2, which is the same thing as 2 over 1, is going to be 1 over 2. I'm going to put a box around it so I remember that that is the reciprocal. To find the reciprocal of 1 and 1/3, we first have to express 1 and 1/3 as an improper fraction. So we're going to do 1 times 3, which is 3, plus 1, which is going to be 4. So again, that's going to be 4 over 3. That is the improper fraction equivalent of 1 and 1/3. So now we got to find the reciprocal of 4/3. Again, just exchange your numerator and denominator. The reciprocal of 1 and 1/3, which is the same thing as 4/3, is going to be 3/4. Again, that's the reciprocal. So I'll put a box around it. What is the product of these reciprocals? That means you're just going to multiply them all together. So we have 3/4 times 4 over 1 times 1 over 2. When you multiply fractions, you just multiply straight across. So in our numerator, we have 3 times 4, which is 12, times 1, which is 12. In our denominator, we have 4 times 1, which is 4, times 2, which is 8. This isn't an answer choice because this is an improper fraction that we're going to convert back to a mixed number via some simple long division. Again, I could read this as 12 divided by 8. How many times does 8 go into 12 without going over? That's going to be 1 time. 1 times 8 is 8. 12 minus 8 is 4. We have enough to write our mixed number. This 1 is going to be our whole number. This 4 is going to be the numerator of our fraction. This 8 is going to be our denominator. Of course, this isn't an answer choice because we could reduce 4 and 8 by a common factor of 4. Uh, 4 divided by 4 is 1. 8 divided by 4 is 2. So the product of the reciprocals of 1 and 1/3, 1/4, and 2 is clearly C, 1 and 1/2. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says the hypotenuse of a right triangle has a length of 12 units and a side that is 8 units long. Which equation can be used to find the length of the remaining side? So if it's helpful in this case, you may want to make a quick sketch of a right triangle. Again, as a reminder, on the actual ASVAB and PiCAT, you'll have scratch paper, but you won't have a reference sheet or a calculator. The hypotenuse is always directly across from the right angle. And according to the problem, the hypotenuse of this right triangle is 12. Likewise, we're told one of its legs is 8, and we want to find its remaining side. I'm going to call its remaining side the unknown value x. Well, how do you find a missing value in a right triangle? You use Pythagorean's theorem, which says a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. This is a formula you need to know for the ASVAB and PiCAT, so commit it to memory. A and B are the legs of the right triangle, and C is the hypotenuse. So C in this case is 12. I'm going to let A be 8 and B be x. So let's just go ahead and plug these values into the Pythagorean theorem. This becomes 8 squared plus, again, I let B be x, so this is x squared equals 12 squared. Again, we want to solve this equation for the missing side, which is x. So I'm going to subtract 8 squared from both sides of the equation. This crosses out, leaving me with x squared equals 12 squared minus 8 squared. And this problem is a little bit easy in that we don't have to keep working this out. We can actually see that this is answer choice B. And just like that, we are done. If we were to keep solving this one, we would find this remaining side. But in this case, they're just testing your knowledge of the Pythagorean theorem and your ability to rearrange it such that you can solve for one of the sides. ASVAB PiCAT Math Knowledge Practice Test question says if a rectangle has a length of 12 inches and a width of 5 inches, what is the length of its diagonal? So when you put a diagonal on a rectangle, as I've done down here, you create two right triangles. Therefore, we can find this diagonal by using the Pythagorean theorem that says a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where a and b are the lengths of the leg and c is the length of the hypotenuse. So this is c, that means this is a and this is b. Let's plug those in. This becomes 12 squared plus 5 squared equals c squared. 12 squared is 144. 5 squared is 25 equals c squared. 144 plus 25 is 169 equals c squared. Again, we just want c, not c squared. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. In doing so, this says c equals the square root of 169, which is 13. Therefore, we know the length of our diagonal is c, 13 inches. Math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is 250.025 rounded to the nearest hundredth? So again, we're rounding 250.025 to the nearest hundredth. Again, that's going to be to the right of the decimal. This 0 is in the 10 spot, this 2 is in the 100 spot, and this 5 is in the 1,000 spot. So we're going to look at this 2 since it's in our 100 spot. And specifically, we're going to look to the number to the right of 2. If the number to the right of 2 is 5 or greater, we round up. If it's below 5, we keep this 2 the same. Since this is 5, we're going to round this up, and this becomes 250.03. All right, so this one is C. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says simplify a plus b to the fifth over a plus b to the third. So there's actually two ways you can simplify this expression. You could use one of the laws of exponents, notably the quotient rule, to quickly simplify this one. That said, if it's test day and you're a little unsure as to how to proceed, you can do this one somewhat of the long way. A plus b to the fifth means you take a plus b and you multiply it by itself 5 times, of course. And a plus b to the third likewise means you take a plus b and you multiply it by itself 3 times, of course. And if you recall, you can cross out corresponding values in your numerator and denominator. So I'm going to cross out this pair of a and b, this pair of a and b, and this pair of a and b. And this leaves me with a plus b times a plus b in the numerator by itself. And we have a plus b times itself twice. So that's the same thing as a plus b squared. So this one simplifies to be a plus b squared. If you wanted to use the laws of exponents, notably the quotient rule, again, the quotient rule says if you have a to the m over a to the n, you simply subtract our exponents to be a to the m minus n. In this case, we're going to treat a plus b as a. So it looks like this, a plus b to the fifth over a plus b to the third is going to be equal to a plus b to the 5 minus 3, which is the same thing as a plus b squared. It really doesn't matter how you solve this one. Takes you about the same amount of time either way, but that is that one. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says simplify 2x squared plus 5x plus 2 over x plus 1 times x squared minus 1 over x plus 2. So these are called rational expressions. We're multiplying them together. In order to simplify rational expressions, you first factor whatever you can, and then you cross reduce accordingly. So I'm going to rewrite this one like this to make it a little bit easier to see. I can't factor x plus 2, so I'm just going to bring that down. How do I factor x squared minus 1? Well, that's just x plus 1 times x minus 1. We can't factor x plus 1 here, so just bring it down as is. But this 2x squared plus 5x plus 2 is something we can factor using the AC method. We're going to multiply 2, which is A, times 2, which is C. 2 times 2 is 4. We're going to identify B. B is 5. Now we're looking for two numbers that multiply to 4 and add to 5, so that's going to be 1 and 4. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 plus 4 is 5. We're going to take 1 and 4 and rewrite this middle term, and then we're going to factor by grouping. So this is 2x squared. I'm going to put this 4 first, plus 4x plus 1x. 1x is just x plus 2. Now we're going to factor by grouping. From these first two terms, I can factor out a 2x. This leaves me with x plus 2 in parentheses. Now from these next two terms, I want to factor out something that gives me x plus 2 in parentheses. So I'm going to factor out a 1. So this is plus 1 times x plus 2. All right, so our factoring is going to be 2x plus 1. That's one solution times x plus 2. So we just factored that, and we're going to write that up here. We have 2x plus 1 times x plus 2. All right, so now we can cross reduce. We have an x plus 1 here and an x plus 1 here. So we're going to leave a 1 down here to represent that this is divided by 1. Then we have an x plus 2 here and an x plus 2 here. Again, if it's helpful, put that 1 there. 2x plus 1 divided by 1 is just 2x plus 1. And this is times x minus 1 over 1, which is just x minus 1. So this is our solution. Of course, in order to have it match one of these answer choices, we have to multiply it out using the FOIL method. So we're going to multiply 2x here and here, and we're going to multiply 1 here and here. And let's do that very quickly. 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times negative 1 is negative 2x. 1 times x is just plus x. And then 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. Let's simplify that. This is 2x squared. Negative 2x minus x is minus x. And then we just have negative 1. So this is our answer, 2x squared minus x minus 1. You can see that that is answer choice B. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says simplify the expression x squared minus x minus 2 over x plus 1. So as a quick reminder, you're not permitted to use a calculator or a reference sheet on the ASVAB or PiCAT. So you want to get used to copying things down. Now, in this case, in order to simplify this expression, not surprisingly, we're going to try to factor what's in the numerator here. And if we can factor it, it's going to look like this, x times x. Now we're looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 2 but add to negative 1. That's going to be negative 2 and positive 1. Again, negative 2 times positive 1 is negative 2. Negative 2 plus 1 is negative 1. So now that we've factored that, all we have to do is cross out these corresponding values in our numerator and denominator. So our x plus 1s get crossed out, leaving us with x minus 2. And just like that, we simplified this expression. The correct answer is B, of course. Before you go and take this test, you have to be able to factor. You will see at least 2 to 5 factoring questions on your test, so make sure you can factor. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says solve for x. We have x squared minus 9x plus 20 equals 0. So of course we have a quadratic that has a leading coefficient of 1. So if we're going to solve this one, we're probably going to solve it via factoring, and it should look like this, x times x in parentheses. And now we're looking for two numbers that multiply to positive 20, but add to negative 9. That's pretty easy to figure out. What about negative 5 and negative 4? Negative 5 times negative 4 is positive 20. Again, a negative times a negative is a positive. Negative 5 plus negative 4 is negative 9. So now that we figured out those two numbers, what we're going to do is take x minus 5, set it equal to 0 and solve it, and x minus 4 and set it to equal to 0 and solve it. So to solve this one, you just add 5 to both sides. This says x equals 5. To solve this one, you simply add 4 to both sides. This says x equals 4. So our solution is x equals 4 or x equals 5, which is clearly answer choice D in this case. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says solve for x. We have 6 times x minus 3 equals x plus 7. In other words, we want to solve this equation such that we get x equal to something by itself. And since you're not given a reference sheet or a calculator on the ASVAB or PiCAT, it's a good idea to get in the habit of copying things down on your own scratch paper. To start this one, we're going to take this 6 and we're going to distribute it here and here accordingly. 6 times x is 6x. 6 times negative 3 is negative 18 equals x plus 7. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is move this x to this side of the equation via subtraction. In doing so, this crosses out. 6x minus x is 5x minus 18 equals 7. The next thing I'm going to do is add 18 to both sides of the equation to get 5x by itself. This crosses out, leaving you with 5x over here. 17 plus 18 is 25. And finally, to get x by itself, I'm going to divide both sides of the equation by 5. This says x equals 25 divided by 5, which is 5. So this one is C. Now that we know x equals 5, it's always a good idea to plug 5 in for x in the original equation and check it to see if it makes a true statement. So we're going to plug in 5 for x there and there. This says 6 times 5 minus 3 equals 5 plus 7. 6 times 5 minus 3 is 2 equals 5 plus 7 is 12. Does 12 equal 12? Since that is a true statement, we know C is the correct answer. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says if x squared over 25 equals 36, what is x? So in other words, we're trying to solve the equation x squared over 25 equals 36 for x. In other words, we want to get x equal to something by itself. So let's get started by multiplying both sides of this equation by 25. This crosses out, leaving you with x squared over here. 36 times 25, let's do that off to the side so as not to make any simple mistakes here. 5 times 6 is 30, carry a 3. 5 times 3 is 15, 16, 17, 18. Add a 0 placeholder. 2 times 6 is 12, carry a 1. 3 times 2 is 6 plus 1 is 7. Let's add all of this up. This is 0. 8 and 2 is 10, carry a 1. 7, 8, 9. So this says x squared equals 900. To get x by itself, we're going to take the square root of both sides. This crosses out, leaving you with x. What is the square root of 900? Well, you should know that the square root of 9 is 3. So all we're going to have to do is tack on an extra 0. So the square root of 900 is 30. So this one is going to be B. X is 30. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says solve for x. We have x over 2 minus x over 5 equals 3. So as a quick reminder on the actual ASVAB and PiCAT, you will not have a reference sheet or a calculator, but you will have scratch paper, so you want to get in the habit of copying things down. In this case, we're subtracting two fractions. In order to subtract fractions, they have to have a common or the same denominator. In this case, we're looking for a common denominator between 2 and 5. 2 and 5 both go into 10, so that's going to be our common denominator. In other words, we're going to rewrite this equation with a denominator of 10. To write 2 as 10, we have to multiply it by 5. We're also going to do that to its numerator, so this is 5x over 10. To write 5 as 10, we multiply it by 2. We're also going to do that to its numerator. 2 times x is 2x. Now that we have a common denominator, that's not going to change. That said, we can subtract our numerators now, so this becomes 5x minus 2x. 5x minus 2x is going to be 3x over 10 equals 3. We're going to solve for x first by clearing 10 from the denominator. So we're going to multiply both sides of this equation by 10. This says 3x equals 3 times 10 is 30. Now finally, we can divide both sides by 3 to get x by itself. 30 divided by 3 is 10. So x is 10 in this case. You always quickly want to check your work. We know x equals 10, of course. So we're going to plug in 10 for x there and there. And let me do that quickly off to the side here. This becomes 10 over 2 minus 10 over 5 equals 3. We want to check to see if this makes a true statement. If it makes a true statement, it means we did our work correctly. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 10 divided by 5 is 2. 5 minus 2 is 3. Does 3 equal 3? It does. That is a true statement, so I'm confident that D is the correct answer. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, if x plus y plus 15 equals 30 and x plus y equals z, then 50 minus z equals. So let's start by copying these three statements down. We're told, according to the problem, that x plus y plus 15 equals 30. Likewise, we're told that x plus y equals z. And finally, we're told we want to solve for 50 minus z. So clearly, we have to find out what z is, and the easiest way to do that is to start with this first equation. Specifically, we're going to solve it for x and y by subtracting 15 from both sides. In doing so, this crosses out here, leaving you x plus y on this side. 30 minus 15 is 15. All right, so we can see x plus y equals 15, and here we have x plus y equals z. Well, clearly, we know z is 15. Now that we know that z is 15, we could go ahead and plug it in here. This becomes 50 minus 15, which is 35. And so our answer is going to be 35. Now, if you couldn't do 50 minus 15 mentally, you could always do it off to the side. 50 minus 15. 0 minus 5 we can't do. We have to borrow. This becomes 4. This becomes 10. 10 minus 5 is 5. 4 minus 1 is 3. All right, so that is that one. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says if the square root of x plus 6 equals 16, then x equals. So I'm going to start by copying this one down. The square root of x plus 6 equals 16. Again, we're solving this equation for x. So we want to get x equal to something by itself. So let's subtract 6 from both sides. This crosses out, leaving you with the square root of x over here equals 16 minus 6 is 10. To get rid of this square root, we're going to square both sides of our equation. Uh, the square of a square root, just cancel those out, leaving you with x over here. 10 squared is the same thing as 10 times 10, which is 100. So x is 100, as you can see. That said, it's always a good idea to quickly check your work. And to do that, we're going to take 100 and we're going to plug it in for x. This says the square root of 100 plus 6 equals 16. If this makes a true statement, we know we did our work correctly. Square root of 100 is 10 plus 6 equals 16. 10 plus 6 is 16. Does 16 equal 16? It does. Therefore, we know D is the correct answer. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says solve for x. We have x over 2 minus x over 5 equals 3. So as a quick reminder on the actual ASVAB and PiCAT, you will not have a reference sheet or a calculator, but you will have scratch paper, so you want to get in the habit of copying things down. In this case, we're subtracting two fractions. In order to subtract fractions, they have to have a common or the same denominator. In this case, we're looking for a common denominator between 2 and 5. 2 and 5 both go into 10, so that's going to be our common denominator. In other words, we're going to rewrite this equation with a denominator of 10. To write 2 as 10, we have to multiply it by 5. We're also going to do that to its numerator, so this is 5x over 10. To write 5 as 10, we multiply it by 2. We're also going to do that to its numerator. 2 times x is 2x. Now that we have a common denominator, that's not going to change. That said, we can subtract our numerators now, so this becomes 5x minus 2x. 5x minus 2x is going to be 3x over 10 equals 3. We're going to solve for x first by clearing 10 from the denominator. So we're going to multiply both sides of this equation by 10. This says 3x equals 3 times 10 is 30. Now, finally, we can divide both sides by 3 to get x by itself. 30 divided by 3 is 10. So x is 10 in this case. You always quickly want to check your work. We know x equals 10, of course. So we're going to plug in 10 for x there and there. And let me do that quickly off to the side here. This becomes 10 over 2 minus 10 over 5 equals 3. We want to check to see if this makes a true statement. If it makes a true statement, it means we did our work correctly. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 10 divided by 5 is 2. 5 minus 2 is 3. Does 3 equal 3? It does. That is a true statement, so I'm confident that D is the correct answer. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says solve for x. We have x minus 2 over 2 equals x plus 4 over 3. So since you're not permitted to use a calculator or reference sheet on the ASVAB, you want to get in the habit of copying questions down onto your own scratch paper. So that's how I'm going to start this one. Now, this looks like a proportion to me, and the way we solve proportions is via cross multiplication. So in other words, we're going to do 2 times x plus 4, and that's going to look like this. 2 times x plus 4 equals 3 times x minus 2. Of course, we have to distribute this 2 here and here accordingly, and we have to distribute this 3 likewise here and here accordingly. Let's go ahead and do that. This is 2x plus 2 times 4 is 8 equals 3 times x is 3x. 3 times negative 2 is going to be negative 6. All right, so let's go ahead and solve for our letter variable x. The first thing I'm going to do is subtract 2x from both sides. In doing so, this crosses out, leaving me with just 8 on this side. 3x minus 2x is just x minus 6, and let's add 6 to both sides now. This crosses out. This says x equals 8 plus 6, which is 14. So x is 14 in this case. Now, it's a good idea to always quickly check your work. We know x equals 14, so let's go ahead and plug that value back into the original equation. If this makes a true statement, we know we did our work correctly. So this is 14 minus 2 over 2 equals 14 plus 4 over 3. 14 minus 2 is 12, so this is 12 over 2 equals 14 plus 4 is 18 over 3. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 18 divided by 3 is 6. This is a true statement, so I'm confident that we solved this equation correctly. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says solve the equation for C. We have a squared equals b squared over c plus d. In other words, we have to solve this literal equation for c. The first thing we want to do is get c out of the denominator. And to do that, we're going to multiply both sides of this equation by c plus d. So we're going to multiply that side by c plus d and this side by c plus d. In doing so, these cross out here, leaving you with just b squared on this side. Now, in this case, we actually have to distribute this a squared to both c and d accordingly. A squared times c is a squared c, and a squared times d is plus a squared times d. All right, again, we're trying to get c by itself, so the next thing I'm going to do is move a squared times d to the other side of the equation via subtraction. In doing so, this crosses out here, leaving us with a squared times c over here equals negative a squared times d plus b squared. And finally, we can get c by itself by dividing everything by a squared. In doing so, this crosses out. This leaves you with c equals negative a squared times d plus b squared over a squared. So that's what we're looking for as our answer. So they're going to have to start with negative a squared. This one starts with positive a squared, so that's not correct. Negative a squared times d, negative a squared times d, negative a squared times d, plus b squared. This is minus a squared, this is minus b squared, this one is plus b squared. So the correct answer to this one is solving this literal equation for c gives you c equals negative a squared times d plus b squared all over a squared. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is negative 2 plus 9x to the fifth plus 2x to the sixth plus 4x to the fourth subtracted from 8x to the fourth plus 8x to the sixth plus 3 minus 3x to the fifth? So we're subtracting this polynomial from this entire polynomial. To get this one right, you have to set it up correctly. Again, what if this said 2 and what if this said 5? You would say 5 minus 2. Well, the same thing applies here, and this is how we set this one up. Again, we're subtracting polynomials. So I'm going to copy down 8x to the fourth, and I'm going to write very small here because this is going to involve a lot of writing. We have 8x to the sixth. Again, I'm just copying down this polynomial, plus 3 minus 3x to the fifth. And from that, we're subtracting this whole other polynomial. So we're going to put a subtraction sign, parentheses, and then this whole other polynomial. If you do not put the parentheses and a subtraction sign, you'll get this one wrong. So minus 2 plus 9x to the fifth plus 2x to the sixth plus 4x to the fourth. All right, the next key thing that you have to do here is you have to take this negative and distribute it to all these other terms inside parentheses. So there, and finally there. So let's rewrite this as such. Before we distribute that negative, let's first copy down this first part since it's not going to change. Again, we have 8x to the fourth plus 8x to the sixth plus 3 minus 3x to the fifth. Let's distribute that negative. Negative times a negative is going to be a positive, so this is plus 2. Negative times a positive is going to be a negative, so this is minus 9x to the fifth.
Negative times a positive is going to be a negative 2x to the sixth, and a negative times a positive is negative 4x to the fourth. Now, the only other thing we have to do is go through this big expression and simplify it by combining like terms. Let's start with 8x to the fourth. Its corresponding like term is going to have the same letter variable raised to the same power. So x to the fourth here. 8x to the fourth minus 4x to the fourth is going to be 4x to the fourth. Now that we've combined them, go ahead and cross them out. Let's move on. We have 8x to the sixth. Again, x to the sixth power. Its corresponding term is right here, negative 2x to the sixth power. 8x to the sixth power minus 2x to the sixth power is going to be plus 6x to the sixth power. Cross them out now that we've combined them. Then we have 3 and 2. 3 plus 2 is 5. Cross them out now that we've combined them. Then we have negative 3x to the fifth and negative 9x to the fifth. Negative 3x to the fifth minus 9x to the fifth is negative 12x to the fifth. Now we're going to rearrange this or rewrite this with the highest powers coming first. We have 6x to the sixth. That's the highest power. Next we have minus 12x to the fifth. Then we have the fourth power plus 4x to the fourth plus finally 5. So again, our answer has plus 5 at the end. Cross these first two out. 6x to the sixth minus 12x to the fifth plus 4x to the fourth plus 5. Correct answer to this one is C.
This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is negative 3x plus 1? Subtract it from 3x minus 1. Now, in this case, we're being asked to subtract polynomials. That is, we're going to subtract this polynomial from this polynomial. But in case it's helpful to see it, let's use some real numbers to think about this one. What if this one said, what is 2? Subtract it from 5. You would do 5 minus 2. Well, we're going to do the same thing here. Again, we're subtracting this polynomial from this polynomial, and this is how you have to set this one up. 3x minus 1 minus, again, we're subtracting every term here, so it's going to be parentheses negative 3x plus 1. Now, the next step is to take this negative and distribute it here and here. So this is 3x minus 1. Negative times a negative is going to be a positive. So negative times negative 3x is going to be plus 3x. Negative times a positive is a negative. So negative times positive 1 is negative 1. Now to simplify this, all we have to do is combine our like terms. 3x and 3x is 6x. Cross it out now that they're combined. Negative 1 and negative 1 is negative 2. So this one is going to be A, of course. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says which expression represents the volume of a cylinder whose height is equivalent to the length of the radius. So what's a cylinder look like? It has a circular top and bottom that are connected via a tube. How do you find its volume? Well, you really don't have to memorize anything as long as you know how to find the area of a circle. Again, this is a circular face. Its area is pi r squared. And then all we do is multiply that by the height of the cylinder, which is h. All right, so that's how you derive the formula. In this case, we're told that its height is equal to its radius. So in place of h here, we can actually plug in r. This becomes pi r squared times r. Now, using the laws of exponents, notably the product law, we can actually do r squared times r. Again, the product law says a to the m times a to the n is equal to a to the m plus n. That is, you add their exponents. So r squared times r, again, there is no power here, so we assume it's 1, is going to be equal to r to the 2 plus 1, which is r to the third. So this is pi times r to the third, which, as you can see, is answer choice B. Again, you would never square pi for any reason, so those are obviously wrong. All right, so this one is B. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, if a pyramid has a square base with each side measuring 6 units and a height of 4 units, what is its volume? So the formula I'm going to use in this case is very simple. Its volume equals 1/3 times length times width times height. In this case, our base is square, so all the sides are going to be equal. In other words, if this side is 6, all these other sides are 6 as well. In other words, its length is going to be equal to its width, which is going to be equal to 6. So let's go ahead and plug these values in. Again, our length and our width are the same, so we'll just plug in 6 for both of those. And our height, according to the problem, is 4. 1/3 times 6 is the same thing as 6 divided by 3, which is 2. So this is 2 times 6 times 4. And you could proceed however you want here. I'm going to do 6 times 4 right here. So this is 2 times 6 times 4 is 24. 2 times 24 is 48. So this one is going to be D, 48 units cubed, and it's cubed because we're talking about volume, not area. If for some reason you didn't know 1/3 times 6 is 2, you could work it off to the side. Make 6 a fraction by placing it over 1. When you multiply fractions, you just multiply straight across. 1 times 6 is 6. 3 times 1 is 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. So that's how I got that 2 there. Again, you should be able to do 2 times 24 mentally. That said, if you couldn't, do 24 times 2 off to the side. 4 times 2 is 8. 2 times 2 is 4. All right, so that is that one. You do have to be able to find the volume of a pyramid for the ASVAB and PiCAT. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says find the volume of the sphere in the figure below. Use 3.14 for pi. So if you look on my website, asvabapp.com, you'll see that I have a free reference sheet. And on that reference sheet, there is this formula. I would try to commit it to memory if possible. You can see a problem like this on the actual test. That said, the formula to find the volume of a sphere is very simple to remember. It's 4/3 times pi times your radius raised to the third power. In this case, we can see our radius is 3, so let's go ahead and plug that in and solve accordingly. This becomes 4/3 times pi times 3 to the third power. 3 to the third power is the same thing as 3 times 3 times 3. 3 times 3 is 9 times 3 is 27. So this becomes 4/3 pi times 27. Now, I want to simplify this as much as possible. So I can say 3 goes in a 3 one time, 3 goes in a 27 9 times. So this becomes 4 over 1, which is just 4 times pi times 9. 4 times 9 is 36. So this is 36 pi. And again, according to the problem, we're told to let pi be 3.14. So plug that in. Now, all we're going to do is uh, 3.14 times 36. Move this decimal one 2 times to the right to make this 314 times 36, albeit with 2 decimals to move back in when we're done. 4 times 6 is 24, carry a 2. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 2 is 8. 6 times 3 is 18. Before we start multiplication with this 3, add a 0 placeholder. 4 times 3 is 12, bring down a 2, carry a 1. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4, and 3 times 3 is 9. Let's add all of this up. This is 4. 8 and 2 is 10, carry a 1. 8 and 4 is 12, 13, carry a 1. 9 plus 1 is 11. Bring our 2 decimals back in. We can see the volume is 113.04. This is going to be inches cubed. So this one is B, of course. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the volume of a cube with edge lengths of 6 centimeters? Let me say this. If you can find the volume of a rectangular prism, you can find the volume of a cube. And again, on the ASVAB and PiCAT, you do not get a reference sheet, so you have to know both these formulas. The volume of a rectangular prism is simply length times width times height. What is the difference between a prism and a cube? Well, in cubes, all the values are the same. You can see that this is a height, this is a length, and this is a width. So, in other words, the volume of a cube, unlike the volume of a rectangular prism, is simply one of its side lengths cubed. In this case, we know that that value is 6. So this is going to be 6 to the third, which is the same thing as 6 times 6 times 6. And you may want to work this out off to the side so as not to make any mistakes. 6 times 6 is 36. 36 times 6, again, I'm going to work that out to the side so I don't make mistakes. 36 times 6, 6 times 6 is 36. Drop down to 6, carry a 3. 6 times 3 is 18, 19, 20, 21. So the volume of this cube with an edge length of 6 centimeters is 216 centimeters cubed. So this one is C. If you can find the volume of a rectangular prism, you should be able to find the volume of a cube. As I pointed out, instead of length, width, and height being different, they're all equal in a cube.